Welcome to What Are You Noticing with Kish and Mitra. My co-host is Kish. She is a coach, relatefulness facilitator, and improv teacher.
My co-host is Mitra. He is a Dharma teacher, relatefulness facilitator, and coach. In this podcast, we're going to be covering a wide range of topics such as
Relationships,
insights from coaching and facilitation,
spirituality,
living a good life,
Asian American life,
and what's happening for us on our spiritual journeys. Without any further ado, we hope you enjoy the episode. Take one.
Take one.
Hey Mitra.
Hey, so what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about our spiritual paths and what spirituality means to us and what we mean by spiritual. I feel like it's always really interesting to hear, especially when people have made big life transitions like we have. But I'm just thinking people I meet in my life, it's so interesting to hear like what causes them to change.
Totally. Yeah, and I guess some context background was like, I feel like we really met at the monastery we trained at in Vermont, and kind of had a somewhat similar background of going from like being tech people to transitioning out of that and then doing like a really deep inner training. And so, which was kind of a common theme a lot of times with a lot of the people there, like former tech people trying to find more meaning and like connection. And so, yeah, it seems like a really relevant and juicy topic.
Yeah, the tech to Buddhism pipeline.
Do you want to share, or I could share? How did we start this weird journey?
Why don't you go first?
I'll go first. I think for me, I grew up really into technology. Like I did programming and like made websites when I was like in middle school and high school, and really thought I was going to be like a programmer and make video games. And when I went to when I went to college, I met this really amazing professor that taught world religions, and he taught Buddhism and Taoism and Chinese philosophy, Indian philosophy, and sort of just opened my mind up to all these questions and ideas that I'd always kind of thought about in my back of my mind, but never really had a forum or like a place to really dive deeply into it. And it also coincided with a lot of reflection on like what kind of life do I really want to live. And there was this thing of seeing how my parents came to the States to like make money and be successful, but really saw pretty clearly that it wasn't actually making them happy. Even when we had a lot of money, there was like a lot of misery and suffering. And so like what's actually going to work? Like I was like really disillusioned at a young age that like money was going to solve the problems, even though I knew I needed money. So, and I did a Vipassana 10-day course my junior year of college, which really was transformative. I did like 2 years of Tai Chi and Qigong, which was really amazing for like feeling energy in the body and a lot of the Taoist principles coming to life. And over the years, just kept doing more retreats and more practices, and just always got more and more into it until eventually I was like seriously considering a career transition where I worked at this one tech company for almost 10 years, and I was like finally going to quit. And before I like pivot and like either become a therapist or like get another tech job, I think I'm gonna really want to do this monastery thing and like figure out does enlightenment exist and like what's it like to really dedicate my time to this, because I was like I don't think I'm ever going to give myself the time to do that again if I start another career. And then, as you know, that ended up being like 7-8 years in Vermont, so that was a big There's a big detour.
It sounds like it was something that was on your mind for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm curious what made you pull the switch ultimately, leave your job.
A long time I tried to like marry them together, so I think my professor was like a model for me, where I went to grad school thinking I could study religion and philosophy and then teach it, but pretty quickly I realized I got jaded by academia and was like, I don't think that's going to be satisfying. And then I had a really nice remote job, like it was like in the like 2010s when remote was still a new thing, and so I like worked like 30 hours a week and then spent all my extra time doing like retreats and practices. And I thought maybe I could make money in the daytime and then do practices, weekends and evenings. But after a while, I just kind of just got disillusioned with all of that, and I think the real switch for me was, I mean, honestly, I think it was I was 28 when I joined, or 27 when I joined the monastery, and I was like, I'm almost going to be 30, and in my mind, I had this idea that once you're 30, that's like when life gets really serious, and like you should get a wife or get a husband and get a house and be established and start having kids. So I was like, all right, I gotta like do all that fun stuff when I'm in my 20s, so, because when I'm in my 30s, I'll be like serious and established. So I think it was just sort of like this. For some reason, I had a time limit of like I got to do this all before I'm 30.
Yeah. And now you know that's not true.
Now I know that's not true. 30s are the new 20s, and 40s are the new 30s, and the 60s are the new teens. So, what about for you?
No, it's pretty similar to what you were sharing. Like that disillusionment with the things that I was told were going to make me happy. Like I think even in high school, I remember, I don't think it was super conscious back then as it was like more recently, but I went to this rigorous science and math boarding school, like school kind of, last 2 years of high school, and it was really good for me in a number of ways, and it was a big transition also from the public school that I had attended previously. But it was like really rigorous, and there was just a lot of work. I wasn't sleeping a lot, and it was just really competitive feeling. Like all the people who I was like close friends with there, we were all trying to get into the same top universities. We were all trying to get the same like prizes and science fairs ever. And I think it was so much pressure for me then, and I realized that like that the pursuit of this isn't making me happy. And I think I kind of extrapolated that, like I don't think that any sort of resume building thing is going to make me happy. It's all just a way to prepare for the next and the next, and like what about now? What about the me right now? And so I think that's when I started thinking about it. And then when I went to university, it was more about like feeling lonely and isolated when I was there. And I think that caused me to really go inwards and start asking big questions. And I just kind of started to meditate when I was there because I heard that it would be good for productivity and anxiety and stuff.
Nice.
And I wasn't really doing anything serious. Yeah, but then, yeah, I feel like there's so, like you were saying before this, like when do you start the story? There's so many, it's like you tell the story and it seems like it makes sense, but actually there's all these other random factors that we might not even be consciously aware of that influenced us in big ways.
How did it like mature in fruition? Because I know after college you worked at a startup and were doing that for a while, and then sort of like did the pivot. And how did that pivot, how did you like justify or rationalize that pivot to like yourself and your family?
Oh, that's a good question. I think like I've always had a finger on, is this what I really want? Is this really in alignment with? For whatever reason, when I do something that's not in alignment with, I can really feel it. And I I mean, there's so much that I could say, but just to answer your question, I ended up working at Duolingo as a software, and I graduated, and I knew that it would be a temporary thing. I knew that programming wasn't the thing that I loved, but I thought that it would be a great way for me to use my education, make a lot of money. I felt pretty good about the company. I was like, at least they're doing something that's probably good, and I don't have to drink that much Kool-Aid.
Right.
And I think just the timing of it. So I graduated in 2019, and I just planned on working there for a couple years, but 2020 was the pandemic, and also actually I think you know this. So I started working at the job, and first week I was miserable. I was like crying every day on the bus. I just felt like this is not how I want my life to be. It was such a big transition, and I didn't feel like it was worth it.
Right.
Like, I didn't feel like the work that I was doing was worth that loss of freedom and doing the things that I loved and learning like in areas other than programming. And so I kind of already knew going into it that it wasn't good, it wasn't in alignment. And then over time I saw that I was getting really disconnected from my emotions, and I wasn't really making the kinds of friends and being in the kinds of relationships that I wanted to be in, and it was really taking a toll on me. And during the winter break that we had, which was really nice, I actually went on a circling retreat. I went to the New Year's circling retreat at Maple.
Right.
Yeah, and then that was a huge shift for me.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, and I had never thought about, I mean, Mitra was there when I met him for the first time.
Right.
He was one of the facilitators, and I never thought about, like, I didn't even know about communities, you know? It was just such a different world.
Totally. Yeah. I remember you crying. I think it was on the first or second day, and you're like, why is everyone paying attention to me? Why? I don't deserve this. And I was like,
oh, yeah. Not much has changed.
Except now you facilitate the practice, but yeah.
No, a lot has changed. That underlying feeling of undeservingness is still present sometimes. And I think like I was saying, when I was in college, it was really difficult for me to find people that I really connected with who were interested in the same things as me, and kind of interested in looking at themselves and looking at their lives in a similar way. Like, I went to Princeton, so you know, I say this with love and understanding, but there's a lot of sheeple there.
Sheeple. Very good. What is a sheeple?
I think a sheeple, I don't know if this is the official definition, but to me, a sheeple is someone who listens to what they're being told and doesn't really question it. So I think a lot of my peers, they listen to the messaging that, you know, move to New York City, get a high-paying job, go to nice restaurants, travel, do these high-status activities, whatever, get promoted, move to like the suburbs to settle down or whatever. That's gonna make you happy.
Right.
And I think that's a similar thing that we were told growing up. There's these things that are going to make you happy, but actually I I started questioning that at a, when I was in high school. And it was really nice going to Maple for the first time and seeing other people engaged in the kinds of questioning that I was engaged with, and meeting people who were walking the walk. Like they were actually loving. They're actually really loving people. And after I left, that was really in my mind. And Daniel Thorson, had asked me during the retreat, would you apply for the apprenticeship? And I was like, maybe. I don't know. I'm working.
Guess so. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I went back to work and I was like, this is terrible. I don't want to spend my time doing this. But I did think that I should stay for longer, both to give it a fair shot and then also to for financial reasons. And
Nice.
and then the pandemic hit, and then the police brutality and the Black Lives Matter protests, and it just really made me think. I think the pandemic really made me think that it's almost similar to what you were saying about that deadline of turning 30. It made me feel the sense of urgency that life could change at any moment, and I didn't want to take that for granted. I didn't want to take my time for granted, and then so I just made the decision, and it was. I think I've probably repressed some of this. It was hard to explain it to my parents. I think my dad still doesn't really understand what happened. Yeah.
Yeah, it's making me remember that I actually originally visited Maple just for a day long, for like 24 hours. And I remember it was at the old location in Johnston, Vermont. And I got there, I drove up on I think it was like a Friday night, and they were already finished like evening chanting and we're like preparing to go to sleep. And the directions were really bad. And I got my car stuck in like a snow ditch. And then
Oh.
I just walked to the center, and again, Daniel Thorson actually greeted me because I knew him from before, and I slept there. And then the next day, there was like a day long retreat, and I think I spent like 20 minutes with Soryu one on one and asked him a few questions. And I left Saturday night, and I remember thinking on the drive back to Boston, that's great, but I'm definitely not going to do that. It's like I don't want to wake up at 4:30 in the morning. It was cold. My car got stuck. A few of them lived in a yurt with a wood stove. And it was just freezing cold. And I was like, I have a pretty decent life. I don't need to do that. But similar to you, actually, I did a circling immersion weekend in New York City. I think like a month or two later, and during one of the circles, I think when I got birthday circled, I realized how much the hindrance of self doubt was so strong. And when I cleared that away, it was like crystal clear. No, I actually do want to go there, and I want to try this out. And in a weird way, circling was like the final gate that helped me see clearly, oh no, what my clarified desire, what my real aspiration is to do this monastery thing. So
Yeah. It reminds me of I'm meeting with a bunch of new clients soon, and one of them had written in the intake questionnaire something about how he's disconnected from the things that he wants and the things that he needs, and this shows up in his interactions. And I think that's very true for me as well, and it sounds like for you, it's just so easy to disregard the things that we might care about most, and that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I was working with a medicine client last week, and it was really hard for him where he is so attuned to other people and tries to do nice things for other people all the time, and he wishes his partner would just spontaneously help him and like care for him in small ways. And I was like, I think for her, she's just so used to in her culture to like say what she wants, and she's not attuning and like trying to guess at what you want. So like you can tell her like, part of me would really like you to do more spontaneous acts of like kindness for me, and also you could like give her a clear call to action. So like, I would love it if you made me breakfast, or I would love it if you gave me a massage, or like just give her like a clear what can she do so she doesn't have to like freak out and be like, why are you asking me to do things but you don't tell me what you want.
Yeah, there's this distinction between guess culture, ask culture, and I feel like Asian culture is very much guess culture. Like, oh, like, do you need more food? Do you
Right.
need slippers or whatever it is? Just like try to anticipate their needs first, and then you also never build the muscle of really getting intimate with yourself, building up also that muscle of asking for what you want and potentially getting a no.
Hmm. I'm thinking about the second half of the question now of like, why were we seeking out spirituality, or like what is it about, like what do we mean when we say spirituality, and like what type of spiritual are we drawn towards, or like feel attracted to, or have compatibility with.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like for me, I mean, it's such a big question. And I feel like for me, the way that it's shown up in my life has changed over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think when I was younger, I was really, and I think it makes sense given like my upbringing dynamic, I was really looking for role models who had a life that I could say, oh, I want to be like them when I grow up.
Mm-hmm.
Like the woman that one of my exes and I worked with for like sex and relationship coaching, who also did the ancestral healing work with me, she was the first person I met who I felt like there's something different.
Yeah.
There's something different about her, and she's really loving.
Yes. Yeah, this is the second or third time you mentioned like truly loving, like people that are actually really loving, not, I guess, quote unquote fake
Yeah.
loving. Yeah.
Yeah, or even not even fake loving.
Mm-hmm.
Just like, I don't know, being polite or not caring. So I think that was a big in for me, and still is in a number of ways. Love.
Yeah, it makes me think about when we started Dharma House here in Asheville. We were trying to figure out what's the thing that connects us together, because not everyone here meditates. We all have like different dietary things. We all have different. Some people identify as Buddhist, some don't identify as Buddhist, and it was like, what is? Is there anything that like coheres us, or are we just all like random people that happen to know each other? And I think we got to what I hopefully think is a common thread in maybe like quote unquote true spirituality, that we all really care about loving truth and beauty and goodness, and like there's a shared intention that like truth ought to win out over like comfort or convenience, and like, and if we have to choose between like being good or being convenient or comfortable, we'll want to at least choose good over that. Not to the point of like self-sacrifice or anything, but as like a value. And there also seems to be something around like growth mindset of, it seems like the people that have a sense of like, I have a changing sense of self that can grow and change and expand, and not from a place of like inadequacy, but from a sense of like a self where life is dynamic, growing and changing. And So I think
Mm-hmm.
there's a sense for me of like I really like people that really care about the truth and see the continue growing. And I think one of the evolutions for a lot of us going for the monastery was like how to do that from a place of acceptance and wholeness rather than judging or you know judging ourselves or something.
The thing that that's bringing up for me is I'm trying to make some sort of distinction between like some people don't care about this and then do
Mm-hmm.
care about these values, and um, like I'm trying to square that away with what I believe, which is another thing I believe, which is everyone is on their own spiritual path, but may not be conscious of it, and you know it it could take place across so many lifetimes.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, that's a thorny question because I think deep down people do naturally care about the truth and love and being good. And I don't think anyone would be like, maybe there's some like really not nihilistic, skeptical people that are like, that's not real. But I feel like most people would be like, no, I care about those things.
Yeah, yeah, but I do think that there's a question of how much do you prioritize about those things in your life, and I feel like both of us have been lucky enough, but then also maybe courageous enough to make the bold decisions to live in a way that is not really normal society, to prioritize these things.
Yeah, and even I remember talking to someone recently who lived in the city, who lives in the city, and he pays so much money for being in the city. He's not happy living in New York. And I was thinking, wow, I live in Asheville and I have a bunch of roommates that most people would think that's like a burden, but actually it feels like a little family, and I love living here, and I pay less, and that required like a certain amount of like doing the training at the monastery and cultivating that type of relationship and friendship and community to be able to do this. And I'm so grateful that I did that, even though like on paper that was like going a few years without a salary and seemingly not developing normal life career skills or something. It's
Yeah. It reminds me of that second part of what you were saying that everyone in your Dharma house has in common, which is like this malleability with their identity. And I think each time I mean, maybe once you get to a certain point, maybe you could talk about this, but maybe once you get to a certain point, it's not as scary anymore. But even if, like you said, even if it's something that you like value deep down, it still can be really scary to make a big change because you have to confront, like for you, you had to confront your self-doubt. You had to confront, uh, what's it like to be a me who's not making a salary for that person in New York? Or what's it like to like not be the me who's living by myself in a comfortable apartment or something? Yeah, it's transitions are
mm-hmm.
just difficult, I think, because you have to face that, like whatever attachment you had to your current identity.
Yeah, it makes me also think about like a lot of people go into therapy when there's like a crisis and they're like, oh, I really need therapy. And and kind of like what you're saying about COVID and the pandemic of like being a wake up call for a lot of people. And strangely, COVID was like a great boon to the monastery because a lot of people came to the monastery during COVID. And but there's something I think about the people I like or like in our friend group that it's like we saw, like you said, that these transitions are part of life, and I can either wait for them to happen and kind of just be like a passive bystander, or we can like consciously, deliberately like try to lean into it and sort of factor it into our lives. And I think about how we both do relatefulness and how much that is. It's like always kind of like exhilarating, but also like very challenging at times, and always like, where am I learning to hold presence? And or do I still feel clunky? And I think that's like a big difference. Is I don't know if a lot of people I don't know if a lot of people like being uncomfortable in becoming their next version of who they're trying to be, and or who they are. And
Yeah. Yeah. And it's gonna be uncomfortable. I feel like I have to remind myself of that.
totally, it's part of the package. It's making me think about like, I'm in Asheville now, and it's like a quote unquote a very spiritual place, and there's almost like there's almost like like in modern culture there's almost like a spiritual person as an identity that I don't like. Even though like I think I'm a spiritual person,
Mm,
there's like something where people go so far they almost like lose touch with like normal culture or how most people are, and they almost like
mm,
create it as a like a special identity or like a special way of being that's separate or distinct, and often with the tone of like better than everyone else,
mm-hmm.
and
Interesting.
I don't like that.
I feel like some people would look at us or, look at people who go train at a monastery or what we did and think that we think that way. So I'm curious what do you actually mean?
Oh
What kind
no.
of person are you talking
Oh
about?
no. Oh no, there are arrows coming at me. Hate mail. Hate emails. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the one thing I really liked about the place we trained at was I feel like more so than maybe some other places, which everywhere is great. I like fully support almost every monastery. I think there should be more of them. But I think the place we went to, and one of the reasons I was drawn to it was because it had a more like holistic perspective, and we did like circling, and we did like leadership development, and we did like fundraising, and it didn't feel. I mean, it was definitely like unique and weird, but it didn't feel like totally disconnected from the world. And so, to me, it's like I guess I mean I don't know if there's a spirituality, but for like what I really care about, I really want to learn how to be more comfortable being myself with everything, like around everyone, doing any activity, and really master the things I love. But like recently, I started doing like Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and I started doing like a singing choir, and I'm getting more into dance. And these are all things that are not normal or like I haven't had much experience with in the past. And to me, it's like, does my identity have like a really rigid, narrow sense of like what's okay and what's not okay, or does it have the flexibility and the malleability to adapt to what's needed or what's called for? And so, like in Buddhism, they say like when you get enlightened, you just really become who you are. It's not like you become someone special. And so, to me, there's like an ordinariness once we really get good at this. And I think of like the really good circling people, teachers, and facilitators, and how seamless their like practice is integrated into like even with their friends that aren't into it, have never done that practice, and it's not like a special thing. So I think there's a way in which I strive and aspire to have that similar kind of integration.
Mm-hmm. And who are the people who are making the spiritual self into this like special and better thing? In what ways are they not doing that?
I don't know, because I mean, now that I think about it, I'm like, there's probably definitely a younger version of me that was like that, and maybe it's just like a developmental thing where you have to really specialize and like really go deep in something before you can integrate
Mm,
it back in.
I see. Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
I like that perspective. And I think it holds true for my experience as well. I think it was really helpful for me to go deep and do a lot of work, both like getting more present and like training those skills, and also doing a lot of inner work and healing. And I think one of the things that I believe is that there's just things that like get in the way of us being present. Like we have to do presence. We have to not do those other things. A lot of the like trauma and like reliving trauma that we course of our day-to-day lives, and the ways that like we were talking about, we protect ourselves from feeling the things that we want, or we might like cling on to them really strongly in a way that like prevents us from seeing what else is happening. And I think that it is really helpful to develop those skills in like a particular container that might be separate from like all the other things that, you know, it's just like, I mean, it's still hard mode, but it's less hard mode in some ways.
Yeah. I also have been adopting more and more this idea that like I think any really practice done very deeply can be a spiritual practice. And I was talking to this one of my friends that's like she's like in her 60s, and I have like these lovely chats with her whenever I go to New York. And I was talking about like I really want more wholesome. I wish I had like a list of like wholesome groups, because I found like choir practice is so wholesome and like it feels really good. We sing like really lovely songs, and you just like feel good at the end of the song. And then she suggested doing like ceramics or like knitting, and she was like, "There's like a really strong community in both around ceramics and like yarn and knitting." And I also remember last year I met this master carpenter who said like back in the day, all of the trades used to be like people did it for many generations and had like a mystical core where like when you get really good at it, they start teaching you like the spiritual side to the practice. And so
What?
yeah, yeah. So
Wow.
we lost a lot of that apparently, but
Yeah.
I love the idea of like, and actually, even the teacher at the monastery said this. Like, if you do anything completely and fully, it becomes like a mystical practice. And so there's a way in which I like
Yeah.
this idea of being able to like validate everyone's experience as like you're on a spiritual path, and if you're just like really into something.
Yeah. What if they're really into hard drugs?
Well, depends on the drug. Yeah. I
I
guess,
like how
yeah,
you actually considered.
yeah. I guess there's more factors than just are you really into something. You probably need like attention and skill or community or something.
I think one distinction that I would try out now is like getting deeper into that skill leading to more, like you were saying, truth, love, beauty, goodness. And I think a lot of things are. And I think there are still some things though where it just leads to more like delusion, to more separation from ourselves and others. I think that, for instance, a lot of social media, it's really hard to, at least for me, it's really hard to do it in a way that is not making me disassociated.
Totally. Yeah, and there's also the flip side too of like on one hand, technology values are baked in technology, and it's like social media tends to create separation, but there's also like how we approach the technology. So like a lot of people will meditate or can actually create more separation. And so there's also this question of like what's the mindset or the attitude that we bring to the practice. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably the most important thing that like we have in common, and most of my friends, it's more about the perspective that they're approaching life with, seeing everything as part of the spiritual path.
Totally. Yeah, like you said, it's like what's the thing that we're doing instead of staying in presence? Or
Yeah.
when do we get fragmented,
Is fragmented like an IFS term?
I don't know if it's an IFS. In my coaching modality, Alethea, they talk about people are usually in parts whenever they feel like something about themselves is like bad or wrong or lacking in some way or inadequate. And so, and usually that means to me like meditation, which might be another definition for spirituality, is like trying to return to wholeness.
That's what my name means. That's what my Dharma name means.
Oh, really?
Return to authenticity.
Whoa, that's so good. Okay. It fits so well.
Thanks, Mitra.
That's really good.
Thanks for listening. This podcast was executive produced by Mitra and Kish, was written by Kish and Mitra, and performed by Mitra and Kish. Like, review, and subscribe wherever your podcasts are found.
For more information about Mitra, you can visit his website at peterxpark.com. And for more information about me, you can visit my website at kishanyu.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.